At the arrivals hall of Athens International Airport, camera shutters clattered as a young woman stepped through the sliding doors. She was greeted with a black and white keffiyeh scarf, a symbol of solidarity with the Palestinians. Her name was already known across the globe. Greta Thunberg, the Swedish climate justice campaigner who had now found herself at the centre of a high-stakes confrontation on the Mediterranean Sea. Only hours earlier, the Israeli authorities had announced that they had deported Greta Thunberg and 171 other international activists, all of them part of the Global Sumud Flotilla, a civilian convoy of boats that had set sail with the declared goal of breaking Israel's blockade of Gaza and delivering emergency aid to a territory the United Nations has declared to be in a state of famine after 2 years of war. As she entered the terminal, Greta, wearing the keffiyeh over her jacket, paused to hug fellow passengers who had been detained with her. In the background, the clamour of television crews rose to a crescendo. A few supporters raised their fists in greeting. She answered the gesture, briefly lifting her own fist. The moment was brief but unmistakably symbolic. A famous activist returning not from a climate summit, but from the deck of an intercepted aid flotilla. Nearby, other members of the flotilla spoke in low, tired voices as they moved through passport control. Many were still wearing the same clothes they had worn aboard the boats when Israeli commandos boarded them in the Mediterranean. The Israeli Foreign Ministry, in a statement posted on the social platform X, declared that another 171 provocateurs from the Hamas Sumud Flotilla were sent from Israel to Greece and Slovakia. The same statement insisted that all legal rights of the participants have been and will continue to be fully respected. Yet the word provocateurs angered many of the activists who saw themselves as humanitarians trying to bring medicine, food and water filters to a besieged coastal enclave. Israel's government confirmed that 138 others from the flotilla remained in detention and that in total around 400 people had been apprehended in the operation that began last Wednesday when Israeli naval forces intercepted the first wave of vessels in international waters. Some of the deportees, speaking earlier in Istanbul as they transited back to their home countries, accused the Israeli forces of violence. One activist told reporters bluntly that they had been treated like animals. The Foreign Ministry in Jerusalem strongly denied those claims, saying that no mistreatment had occurred. The flotilla itself had been an unusual coalition. Its name, Sumud, an Arabic word often translated as steadfastness or resilience, reflected the spirit that the organisers said was needed to break the cycle of blockade and suffering. 45 vessels, from small sailing boats to larger support ships, had departed from ports across the Mediterranean. The most determined crews came from as far afield as Spain, Norway, South Africa, the United States and Pakistan. Greta Thunberg had joined the effort late in the summer, photographed boarding one of the support vessels in Barcelona at the end of August. Her presence as one of the most recognisable faces of youth activism drew worldwide attention and also controversy. Israeli officials said her involvement gave a propaganda victory to Hamas, the militant group that remains in control of Gaza. Human rights groups countered that Greta's decision to sail with the flotilla shone a needed spotlight on what they call a man-made famine. Footage captured by the flotilla's own crews shows scenes that will long be debated. On the deck of the ship, Captain Nikos, dozens of passengers can be seen standing with their hands raised in the air as Israeli commandos boarded. On another vessel, Florida, soldiers can be seen removing a surveillance camera as passengers huddled together. On the boat, Oxygono, heavily armed men in naval fatigue scrambled over the side as voices shouted in different languages. Other video clips show similar scenes on the smaller vessels Wahoo and All In, passengers raising their hands above their heads as the boarding began. The images gave the world a vivid sense of the tension on those October nights when the flotilla's journey came to a halt in the dark waters of the eastern Mediterranean. For the activists, it was the culmination of months of planning. For the Israeli Navy, it was a show of determination to maintain what it insists is a necessary maritime security cordon to prevent weapons from reaching Hamas. In Makri Gialos, Greece, the boats had first assembled, the crews loading boxes of food supplements, tents and medical kits. Many of the volunteers believed they would reach Gaza despite the warnings issued by Israel. Among them were seasoned campaigners from previous flotilla efforts and a new generation of young activists who grew up watching news of blockades and bombardments. As the flotilla set out to sea, Many waved Palestinian flags and chanted slogans about breaking the blockade. Supporters filmed the departure on their phones, some live streaming as the boat sailed out into choppy waters. The standoff reached its climax on October 2nd, when Israeli forces moved to intercept. According to the Navy, the operation was conducted in international waters, but in line with security procedures that have been in place since the blockade was first imposed more than a decade ago. For the activists, that was an act of illegitimate aggression against a peaceful mission. Over the days that followed, detainees were brought to Israeli ports, processed, and then taken to holding centres. By the weekend, deportations began, with plane loads of activists flown to Turkey, Greece, and Slovakia. In Athens, the first wave of deportees to arrive included Greta Thunberg, who had been held for several days before being placed on a flight out of Israel. At the airport in Athens, one activist who had been on the same vessel as Greta told reporters, "We were bringing bread and medicine, not weapons. We were met with force, handcuffed and humiliated, but our mission is not over." The experience of detention was described in harrowing terms by several activists. They alleged they had been deprived of sleep, subjected to rough handling during interrogation, and denied timely access to legal counsel. Israeli authorities categorically reject those accusations. Diplomatically, the flotilla crisis added another layer of tension to an already volatile situation. Several European governments, including Italy and France, whose citizens were among those detained, lodged formal requests for clarifications about the conditions of their nationals. The United States confirmed that some American citizens had also been on the boats. In Slovakia's capital, Bratislava, cameras captured another scene of weary activists arriving after deportation. Some were greeted quietly by family members, others by local solidarity groups waving Palestinian flags. From the Israeli government's perspective, the operation was both necessary and carefully managed. Officials argued that the blockade is essential to stop arms smuggling into Gaza and to limit Hamas's military capacity. They maintain that humanitarian aid can and should go through approved land crossings under Israeli supervision. For the activists, however, the flotilla was intended to challenge precisely that system. Greta Thunberg herself, speaking briefly to journalists before being ushered away by Greek airport security, said, "The world cannot look away while an entire population is starved. We came with peaceful intentions. We will keep demanding that the siege ends." Her words were carried across international news networks within minutes, igniting new debate over the role of high-profile activists in conflict zones. The controversy comes as the humanitarian situation in Gaza continues to deteriorate. The United Nations has warned that famine conditions have taken hold in several districts of the enclave, which has been heavily damaged